Winter, 1944. Isle of Man, Great Britain. The steam rising from the teacup captivated the German woman as she watched the British guard pour milk into the dark liquid. After 3 years working in signals intelligence near Hamburg, surviving on turnip soup and ersatz coffee made from acorns, this simple beverage with real milk and 2 lumps of sugar represented a world she had been told no longer existed in Britain. "Biscuits with your tea?" asked the guard, offering a tin of what Germans would call cookies. Helene Meyer, a 23-year-old Nachrichtenhelferinnen, female signals auxiliary, stared in disbelief. In Germany, such treats had vanished by 1942. Nazi newspapers had reported for years that Britain was starving under German U-boat blockades, its population subsisting on turnips and cabbage, while its military hoarded dwindling supplies. Yet here was evidence to the contrary: tea with real milk, sugar cubes in a bowl, and a tin of wheat flour biscuits offered casually as if they were ordinary items rather than precious luxuries. Meyer would later write in her diary, recovered by historians in 1978, "I did not know whether to laugh or cry. Everything we were told about England's food situation was clearly propaganda. I took 3 biscuits and felt immediate shame for my greed." Across British internment facilities that winter, 3,427 female German prisoners confronted a similar reality that contradicted everything Goebbels' propaganda had taught them about British deprivation. These women, primarily Nachrichtenhelferinnen from signals intelligence, administrative staff from Luftwaffe bases, and nurses captured as German forces retreated, discovered an island nation where tea remained a sacrosanct ritual, where milk was reserved even for prisoners, where bread, though brown and heavy, remained available without the sawdust extenders common in late-war German loaves. These simple foods, ordinary by pre-war European standards, systematically undermined Nazi claims about Britain's imminent collapse. The arithmetic of British rationing was being written in ounces of butter and spoonfuls of sugar, revealing a managed scarcity rather than the desperate hunger these women had been led to expect. What began as surprise at British tea rituals would evolve into complete psychological reassessment of everything they had been told about the enemy. The Channel crossing. The collapse of German positions in France during autumn 1944 brought approximately 1,800 German women in auxiliary roles into British custody. Another 1,600 would follow in early 1945 as Allied forces pushed into Germany itself. These Helferinnen, women who had replaced men in communications and administrative roles to free male personnel for combat, expected harsh treatment. Nazi briefings had prepared them for a vengeance-minded British military and near-starvation conditions. Instead, they received standard British Army field rations during transport. 3,000 calories daily, including corned beef, preserved vegetables, tea, powdered milk, and most surprisingly, a daily allowance of 4 biscuits from British Army stores. While British civilians were limited to 2 ounces of butter weekly, prisoners received the full military butter ration of 3.5 ounces. Military records show that female prisoners, many suffering various degrees of malnutrition from Germany's collapsing food supply, gained an average of 2.3 kilograms during their first month in British custody. The systematic feeding of captured German women with rations superior to what they had received in their own service began immediately, though its psychological impact would only be fully understood later. A former Luftwaffe administrative assistant interviewed in 1976 recalled, "We expected hunger as prisoners. Instead, the British fed us regularly with portions that seemed generous compared to what we had in Germany by 1944. This confusion about British food resources began our re-education. The transport ships carrying women prisoners across the Channel in late 1944 provided intensive exposure to British military provisioning. Unlike the horrific conditions of Eastern Front transport or even civilian evacuation within Germany, these vessels maintained proper rations. Naval records confirm that female prisoners received 3 meals daily, with breakfast including porridge made with actual milk, bread with margarine, and tea. Lunch typically featured some form of stew with vegetables and occasionally meat, while dinner provided bread, cheese, and more tea. The caloric value, approximately 2,400 daily, exceeded what these women had received within their own military structure. Most striking to the prisoners was the predictability of these meals. In Germany, by late 1944, one never knew if food would actually arrive as scheduled, wrote former Helferinnen Greta Schulz in her 1952 memoir. In British custody, meals appeared with clockwork regularity, creating a sense of security we had forgotten could exist. When ships docked at British ports like Southampton and Liverpool, the women encountered an England that propaganda had rendered unrecognisable. Southampton, bombed repeatedly by the Luftwaffe, nevertheless functioned as a major port with visible food supplies moving through its facilities. At military processing centres, German women watched as British NAFI, Navy, Army and Air Force institutes, workers served tea with milk and sugar during breaks, a practice that continued despite years of wartime privation. The initial processing at reception centres provided further evidence of British organisational capacity and resource management. Camp records from December 1944 show standard rations issued to all incoming prisoners. Daily bread allocation of 8 ounces, weekly butter or margarine ration of 3.5 ounces, sugar allowance of 8 ounces weekly, and tea sufficient for 3 cups daily. For women who had survived on ersatz coffee without sugar and bread extended with potato flour, these rations represented abundance that defied understanding. January 1945. A convoy of military trucks wound through the narrow lanes of rural Britain, transporting 57 newly captured German Helferinnen from Southampton docks to their permanent internment facility. Hildegard Trutz, a 26-year-old radio operator captured near Aachen, pressed her face to the canvas flap, watching the unfrozen fields roll past. After years of propaganda describing a bombed-out starving island, the sight of ploughed winter fields and grazing livestock contradicted everything she had been told about Britain's agricultural collapse. The winter journey from frontline capture to British soil followed a carefully documented protocol. According to British War Office records dated November 1944, female prisoners were separated from male captives immediately, processed through female-staffed centres in liberated France, and transported across the Channel on regular military vessels. Lieutenant Mary Somerville's reports from Processing Centre 17 near Bayeux note, German female auxiliaries arrived typically malnourished, with 89% showing signs of vitamin deficiency, particularly evident in dental condition and skin health. During the initial processing, each woman received a standard British Army capture kit containing toiletries, a towel, and notably, a ration of chocolate. 40 grams of Cadbury ration chocolate, the same issued to British forces. For women who hadn't tasted chocolate in years, this simple military provision became momentous. I held the chocolate for 3 days before eating it, recalled former Signals Auxiliary Irmgard Weber in a 1976 interview. It seemed impossible that the British could spare such luxury for prisoners. In Germany, chocolate had disappeared from civilian access by 1942, reserved solely for special military units and Nazi officials. The Channel crossing in January 1945 aboard the HMS Empire Comfort, a requisitioned passenger vessel serving as a troop transport, provided further education in British provisioning. Ship's logs record standard meals served to all passengers regardless of status. Breakfast of porridge with reconstituted milk, bread with margarine and tea. Midday meal of mutton stew with root vegetables. Evening meal of cheese, bread and sweet pudding. British Wren personnel overseeing female prisoners reported their astonishment at seeing German women carefully collecting breadcrumbs and wrapping half portions to save for later. Behaviours developed through years of increasing scarcity. British military transport officer Captain William Harrington noted in February 1945, female German prisoners seemed genuinely shocked at regular meals. Many request permission to retain portions of bread from one meal to the next, apparently expecting the food to stop without warning. This behavior suggests severe food insecurity in their recent experience, despite their military status, which typically receives priority rations. Comparative military records reveal the widening gulf between German and British provisioning by 1944-45. German female auxiliaries stationed at communication centres received official rations of 1,800 calories daily by late 1944, though actual delivery had become irregular as transport systems collapsed. British female military personnel received guaranteed 2,200 calories daily, with prisoner rations set at 2,000 calories, higher than German civilian rations. This disparity, carefully documented by the International Red Cross, created cognitive dissonance among prisoners who observed no evidence of the starvation conditions Goebbels had claimed existed throughout Britain. Upon arrival at Port Erin camp on the Isle of Man on January 17, 1945, the new arrivals underwent medical examination that documented their nutritional status. Camp Medical Officer Dr. Eliza Morrison's records show 76% of arrivals classified as underweight, with an average deficit of 5 kilograms below standard weight charts. Most notable, Dr. Morrison wrote, is the poor condition of dentition and prevalence of skin conditions indicating prolonged malnutrition, particularly striking in women of otherwise military age and presumed priority status within German resource allocation. The first full meal at permanent internment facilities delivered another shock. Camp records detail the standard dinner served that January evening: beef stew with potatoes and carrots using Argentine canned beef, 2 slices of national loaf bread, the standard British wartime bread, a pat of margarine, and bread pudding made with dried fruit and a small amount of sugar. Tea was served with reconstituted milk. While modest by pre-war standards, this meal represented normality and sufficiency beyond what most had experienced in the final years of Nazi Germany. Ursula Kramer, a Luftwaffe clerical worker captured in Belgium, wrote in a letter, later confiscated by camp censors, "The food here seems impossible. Yesterday they served us pudding with actual raisins. How can they spare such things for enemies when we had nothing like this even for our own soldiers? Everything we were told about England's collapse seems increasingly questionable." The predictability of meals created profound psychological impact. British camps operated on strict timetables, with breakfast at 800 hours, midday meal at 1300 hours, an evening meal at 1800 hours. This regularity, 3 meals daily, every day, without fail, contradicted the feast or famine experience that had become normal in Germany. Camp Commander Margaret Fellows noted in her February 1945 report, "The German women display unusual anxiety around mealtimes, arriving early and appearing concerned that food might not actually appear. This behavior typically diminishes after 3 weeks in custody, as they begin to trust the predictability of our schedule." British YMCA representatives visited female POW camps regularly, bringing additional comfort items. Records from February 1945 document distribution of supplementary food parcels containing 200 grams of biscuits, 50 grams of chocolate, tea bags, and small jars of Marmite, a distinctly British yeast extract spread rich in B vitamins. The women's reactions to Marmite became legendary among camp staff, with most German prisoners finding the strong flavour shocking but gradually appreciating its nutritional benefits as their health improved. Spring 1945. Russian camp, Isle of Man. The morning bell rang at precisely 0700 hours, signalling another day of predictable routine for the 548 German women housed in the requisitioned holiday camp. Former luxury tourist accommodations, modest by peacetime standards but spacious compared to military barracks, had been converted to house Helferin and captured during the Allied advance. Each dormitory contained 10 beds with actual sheets and blankets, luxuries that had become scarce in wartime Germany. In the mess hall, breakfast appeared with clockwork precision: porridge made with reconstituted milk, 2 slices of national loaf bread with a measured portion of margarine, and tea with milk and 1 sugar cube. The bread, though darker and heavier than pre-war varieties, contained actual wheat flour without the sawdust or potato starch extenders, common in late-war German bread. Camp records document that breakfast provided approximately 600 calories, with daily rations totaling 2,100 calories, sustained even as British civilian rations reached their lowest point of the war. Helga Weber, a 20-year-old communications specialist captured near Cologne, wrote in a diary eventually donated to the Imperial War Museum. The English eat porridge every morning with milk. At first it seemed strange, but now I wait eagerly for it. They call even simple things by special names. Cookies are biscuits and mashed potatoes are simply mash. The guards laugh when we get confused. The midday meal, served at 1300 hours sharp, typically featured a hearty soup or stew. Camp kitchen records from April 1945 show regular rotation of dishes. Woolton pie, vegetables in white sauce with potato topping, named after the Minister of Food. Irish stew using Argentine corned beef, potato and leek soup, and occasionally fish on Fridays. Each meal included 2 slices of bread and concluded with simple puddings, rice pudding, semolina pudding, or bread pudding with dried fruit. Evening meals, lighter but still substantial, arrived at 1800 hours. Cheese, bread, margarine, occasionally cold meat or fish paste, and always tea. The predictable schedule itself represented security that many women hadn't experienced in years, as German civilian and military food distribution had become increasingly erratic under Allied bombing. British rationing, though strict, operated with remarkable consistency. Camp supply records show exact weekly allocations. Each prisoner received 8 ounces of sugar, 8 ounces of butter or margarine, 4 ounces of cheese, 1 egg, or powdered equivalent, and 16 ounces of meat, often bulked with oatmeal as in traditional Scottish haggis or black pudding. These rations, though reduced from peacetime standards, were distributed without fail each week. The Nafi canteen, open to prisoners for 2 hours daily, offered additional items for purchase using camp currency earned through voluntary work. Price lists from May 1945 show modest luxuries available. Extra tea, 2 pence per cup, biscuits, 1 penny each, meat paste sandwiches, 3 pence, and occasionally chocolate, 4 pence per small bar. Women earned approximately 6 pence daily for camp work, creating the novel experience of consumer choice after years of simple scarcity. Medical officer reports document the physical transformation of prisoners during their first 3 months in British custody. Dr. Sarah Mitchell's quarterly report dated June 1945 states, "Female German prisoners show remarkable improvement in overall health. Average weight gain of 3.2 kilo per individual, improved skin condition, and reduction in vitamin deficiency symptoms. Dental issues remain prevalent but show no further degradation." Most striking to medical staff was the emotional response to food security. Camp psychologist Edward Barnes noted, "Many women display behaviors typically seen in children who have experienced food insecurity, hiding bread portions, becoming anxious when meals are delayed even briefly, expressing disproportionate gratitude for small extras. These behaviors typically diminish after approximately 3 months in custody as they adjust to reliable provisioning." The contrast between British and German conditions became starkly apparent through camp newspapers. The British government permitted prisoners to receive heavily censored German newspapers, which by spring 1945 acknowledged severe food shortages throughout Germany. Simultaneously, British newspapers, also made available in limited quantities, reported continued rationing but stable food supply. This juxtaposition created undeniable evidence that contradicted years of propaganda about Britain's imminent starvation. Comparative statistics, later compiled by nutrition researchers, revealed the gap. By April 1945, average German civilian rations had fallen to approximately 100 calories daily, often including substantial proportions of turnips, rutabagas, and other low-nutrient fillers. British civilian rations never fell below 2,000 calories daily, with prisoners maintained at the same level. The mathematics of survival was written in these numbers, revealing a British rationing system that, while austere, maintained basic nutrition even for enemy captives. The physical environment of the camps reinforced this lesson in managed scarcity versus chaotic collapse. Russian camp, while hardly luxurious, maintained consistent hot water for 1 shower weekly per prisoner, electric lighting until 2200 hours, and heated dormitories, amenities that had become unreliable even in German military facilities by war's end. Camp Commander Ellen Richardson's monthly report from March 1945 notes, German women frequently express surprise at our ability to maintain basic services despite years of war. Several have commented that heat and electricity in their German facilities had become unpredictable by late 1944. Most revealing was the prisoners' response to special occasion meals. Easter 1945 brought a modest but significant improvement to standard rations. Kitchen records document the Easter Sunday meal: roast mutton with potatoes and cabbage, followed by a special pudding containing extra dried fruit and a small amount of white sugar, with tea served with fresh milk rather than reconstituted powder. The women's reaction, as recorded by YMCA observer Ruth Phillips, was overwhelming. Many were moved to tears by what seemed to British staff a very modest special meal. Several expressed disbelief that enemies would be included in holiday observances at all. Summer 1945, Lancashire farmland. Margaret Schultz, a former Luftwaffe communications specialist, stood beside a British Land Army woman named Dorothy, both up to their elbows in raspberry bushes. "No, love, the right ones only," instructed Dorothy, demonstrating how to select berries at peak ripeness. "These go to jam making for the national stocks." Under the agricultural work program instituted in May 1945, female German prisoners could volunteer for farm labor, receiving extra rations and small wages, while addressing Britain's critical agricultural labor shortage. This interaction, German prisoner and British civilian working side by side, created unexpected cultural exchange centered around food. Work detail records from Lancashire farms show 87 German women participating in the summer harvest of 1945, working alongside British Land Army women who had replaced male farm workers serving in the military. The German women, predominantly from urban backgrounds, received practical education in British agriculture and food processing that contradicted everything they had been told about Britain's collapsing food production. "I never knew how England managed to feed itself on this small island," wrote Helga Brandt, a signals operator captured in France, in a letter home that passed through British censors. "Today, I helped harvest potatoes, tons of them from a single field. The English waste nothing. Even misshapen vegetables go to communal kitchens or animal feed. Their organization is remarkable." In camp kitchens, another form of cultural exchange occurred. British cooks, often from the Women's Voluntary Service, supervised German prisoners in food preparation, creating unexpected culinary diplomacy. Kitchen duty logs from Russian camp record German women learning to prepare distinctly British dishes: steak and kidney pudding, treacle tart, and proper custard. Simultaneously, British cooks showed interest in the German women's techniques for extending limited ingredients, particularly in bread making and soup preparation. "The German girls taught us clever ways to make soup more filling with oats," reported Dorothy Miller, a WVS volunteer at Manchester internment camp. "We showed them how to make a proper Sunday pudding with suet. At first they found our food plain, but soon came to appreciate tea properly brewed and custard made with real eggs." Christmas 1945 marked a turning point in this culinary exchange. With the war officially over, but repatriation delayed by administrative challenges and Germany's collapsed infrastructure, British authorities authorised special holiday provisions for camps. Records from the Ministry of Food show additional allocations to POW camps for Christmas: 2 ounces of dried fruit per prisoner, 1 extra ounce of sugar, 2 ounces of margarine, and most remarkably, 1 ounce of real chocolate per prisoner, at a time when British children received only 3 ounces monthly. The Christmas meals served at internment facilities across Britain featured roast beef, often from Argentine imports, roast potatoes, 2 vegetables, and Christmas pudding with custard. Camp Commander Margaret Williams at Port Erin noted, "The women were overwhelmed by the Christmas provisions. Many said this exceeded what they had experienced at Christmas in Germany since 1942. The most emotional moment came when we distributed small gift packages containing tea, biscuits, and chocolate, items still strictly rationed for our own people." These holiday experiences, repeated at Easter 1946, demonstrated a British approach to manage scarcity that maintained morale through occasional celebrations, despite ongoing rationing. This contradicted the German experience of increasingly chaotic deprivation as the war progressed, where even military personnel experienced unpredictable feast or famine cycles by 1944. Through agricultural work details, German women gained unprecedented insight into British food production systems. Farm assignment records show prisoners working at dairy operations where they witnessed milk processing for national distribution. At a time when milk in Germany had become scarce even for children, Britain maintained its Milk in Schools program throughout the war, providing 1/3 pint daily to every child. This prioritization of nutrition for children, even during severe rationing, particularly impressed the German women. "Today I worked at a dairy farm," wrote Elizabeth Kruger, a former administrative clerk, in a censored letter home. "Every morning, milk goes first to children's schools and hospitals, then to pregnant women and regular customers. The system never fails. In 3 months here, I have seen British children every day drinking milk that German children haven't tasted in years." Hospital kitchen assignments provided another window into British food priorities. Medical facility records from Manchester Royal Infirmary showed German women prisoners assigned to kitchen duties, where they observed special diets for patients, high-protein regimens for recovery, iron-rich meals for anemia cases, and even diabetic-appropriate meals carefully measured and prepared. This specialized nutritional knowledge, maintained despite wartime shortages, demonstrated scientific approaches to food that had deteriorated in late-war Germany. The hospital dietitian's notes mention, "German auxiliaries seem astonished by our ability to maintain specialized feeding regimes during wartime. Several have requested copies of dietary guidelines, particularly for convalescent and infant feeding, to take home after repatriation." Local civilians, initially wary of German prisoners in their communities, gradually engaged in food-centered interactions. Church groups organized occasional tea events where local women met with prisoners, serving standardized social teas consisting of sandwiches, typically fish paste or cheese, 1 small cake or biscuit per person, and tea with milk. These humble offerings, representing British women sharing their own limited rations, created profound impact. Women's Institute records from Lancashire document, "German guests initially declined second cups of tea, seemingly afraid to take too much. They appeared genuinely moved when our members insisted they have more, saying, 'We're all on the same rations now, dear.'" By autumn 1945, many German women were sending carefully documented food information to families in occupied Germany. Censored letters revealed detailed descriptions of British farming practices, preservation techniques, and rationing systems. Ilse Weber's letter to her sister in Hamburg, dated September 1945, meticulously described how to extend flour with potato, British methods for preparing dried eggs, and techniques for making tea last through multiple brewings. This knowledge transfer occurred long before official aid programs began. The culinary exchange culminated in a documented phenomenon: German women requesting copies of Ministry of Food pamphlets before repatriation. These government-issued guides contained recipes and techniques for nutritious meals using limited ingredients. Camp records from 1946 show over 200 official requests for these pamphlets, particularly making the most of potatoes and economical puddings. British authorities, recognizing the humanitarian and diplomatic potential, approved these requests despite paper rationing. Autumn 1946. Repatriation Processing Centre, Dover. Ingrid Müller stood on the scale as the British medical officer recorded her weight. 58 kilograms, a full 7 kilograms heavier than when she arrived as a prisoner 18 months earlier. Around her, dozens of other German women awaited final medical examination before boarding the transport ship home. Their physical transformation told a story more powerful than any propaganda. Enemies who had thrived in British custody were returning to a homeland where civilians had withered under supposed protection of their own government. This physical evidence created undeniable cognitive dissonance. Medical records from repatriation processing centers document that 84% of female German prisoners had gained weight during internment, averaging 4.2 kilograms per person. Blood tests showed improved hemoglobin levels and reduced signs of vitamin deficiency. Dental examinations noted no new cavities or deterioration beyond conditions present at capture. These medical facts contradicted everything these women had been taught about Britain's capacity to feed even its own population, let alone enemy prisoners. "The British system never broke down," wrote Charlotte Weber in a diary recovered by historians in 1978. From the day of capture to the day of release, meals arrived with absolute certainty. 3 times daily, every day, without exception. This reliability itself became a form of re-education about what governments can and should provide, even in crisis. The ideological implications extended beyond mere caloric intake. Letters intercepted by censors reveal profound psychological reassessment occurring among the prisoners. Anna Hoffman wrote to her mother in April 1946, "The British are not monsters as we were told. They have treated us with correctness and even kindness, despite severe shortages. Their rationing system ensures everyone gets something, rather than some getting everything while others starve. This seems more just than what we experienced in the final years of the war." This recognition of systemic fairness in British rationing directly contradicted Nazi ideology regarding resource distribution. While German rationing had maintained privileged categories, Wehrmacht personnel, essential workers, party officials, British rationing operated on more egalitarian principles, with special allowances only for children, pregnant women, and those performing heavy physical labour. This contrast became undeniable as the prisoners observed consistent application of rules regardless of social position. Statistical comparison made the difference stark. By 1946, academic researchers had compiled comprehensive data on nutritional conditions. German civilian rations in 1945 had fallen to approximately 1,100 calories daily in many regions, with actual delivery often unreliable. British civilian rations never dropped below 2,000 calories daily, with consistent nationwide distribution. German prisoners in British custody received standardized 2,200 calories daily throughout their internment, exceeding what was available to most German civilians during the final war years. The most profound ideological challenge came through the reversal of care packages. In direct parallel to the German POW experience in America, by mid-1945, German women in British camps began sending food parcels to family members in occupied Germany rather than receiving them. Red Cross records document approximately 23,000 parcels sent from British camps to Germany between June 1945 and December 1946, typically containing items like tea, sugar, dried milk, chocolate, and soap, goods that had become virtually unobtainable in post-war Germany. Dr. Richard Schroeder, a sociologist who interviewed 142 former female prisoners in the 1970s, concluded, "The experience of sending food from captivity to loved ones in freedom created profound psychological impact. It inverted the expected relationship between prisoner and free citizen, demonstrating the collapse of the system they had served while revealing unexpected humanity in the enemy they had feared." Camp records provide evidence of this transformation through documented conversations. At Port Erin Camp, Recreation Officer Elizabeth Thompson recorded a December 1945 discussion group in which a former Luftwaffe auxiliary stated, "In Germany, We were told the English would starve before we did because of our U-boats. Yet here I am, well fed in captivity, while my family writes of hunger at home. This cannot be explained by bad luck. It must be systematic failure and deliberate lies. Medical evidence further confirmed this ideological challenge. Camp psychologist Joan Maynard documented recurring themes in therapy sessions with German women experiencing anxiety about repatriation. Her report from February 1946 notes, "Many express concern about returning to food insecurity after adjusting to the reliability of camp meals. Several have stated that the predictability of meals here has altered their fundamental sense of security in ways that make them question much of what they previously accepted about both societies." The transformation extended beyond abstract ideology to concrete knowledge. In preparation for repatriation, many women requested specific information about British nutrition practices. Education officer records from summer 1946 show voluntary attendance at practical demonstrations of food preparation techniques using minimal ingredients. German women meticulously copied recipes for stretching meat with oatmeal, making nutritious soups from vegetable scraps, and preparing powdered milk to maximize nutritional value, practical knowledge they would carry home. Censored letters reveal the women preparing their families for their return. Maria Schmidt wrote to her sister in July 1946, "I am not the same person who left. I have learned that suffering was not necessary, that systems can be organized even in crisis. I have gained weight while you have lost it. When I return, I will show you British methods for making food go further. Their discipline in scarcity has lessons for us in rebuilding." A comprehensive Imperial War Museum study, completed in 1986, analysed 764 letters written by female German prisoners during internment. The analysis revealed a clear progression. Initial letters expressed surprise at regular meals. Intermediate communications questioned previous beliefs about British conditions. Later correspondence explicitly rejected Nazi explanations for German deprivation. By the time of repatriation, 62% of letter writers had explicitly acknowledged that their prior understanding had been fundamentally wrong. Perhaps most telling were the recipes and cooking techniques that transferred between nations. British military records from October 1946 document an unusual repatriation request: permission for departing German women to take Ministry of Food cookbooks and pamphlets with them to Germany. The approved list included Making the Most of Rations, the Food Facts Cookery Book, and Potatoes in Wartime. These practical guides, designed for British housewives navigating rationing, would find new purpose in devastated post-war Germany, where women faced even greater challenges in feeding their families. As repatriation ships prepared to depart in late 1946, camp commanders reported a recurring scene: German women carefully packing Ministry of Food pamphlets alongside the modest possessions they had accumulated, prioritizing this practical knowledge over personal items. This transfer of culinary information, from enemy to enemy, represented the ultimate triumph of pragmatic humanity over ideological division. December 1947, Hamburg, British occupation zone. Greta Weber served afternoon tea to her neighbours in her small apartment, carefully pouring the precious brew into cups salvaged from the rubble of her former home. The ritual was unmistakably British. Tea with a splash of powdered milk, thinly sliced bread with margarine, and small biscuits made from oats and a precious spoonful of sugar. Her neighbours watched with curiosity as she performed this ceremony, learned during 18 months as a prisoner in British hands. "In England, they stop everything for tea," she explained, pouring with the deliberate care she had learned from her British guards. "Even during the worst of the war, they maintained this small civilization. I thought it foolish at first, but now I understand its purpose: to create a moment of normalcy, even in chaos." The return home had shocked the former prisoners far more than their original capture. They arrived in a Germany transformed beyond recognition, where major cities lay in rubble and food shortages exceeded even late-war deprivation. Records from British repatriation officials document the striking contrast. Women who had gained an average of 4.2 kilograms in British custody returned to families who had lost 5.8 kilograms during the same period. The physical evidence was undeniable. Enemies had thrived while compatriots had withered. Helene Meyer's account, recorded in a 1974 oral history project, captures this dissonance. I arrived home with rounded cheeks while my mother had become skeletal. She didn't recognize me at the station because she expected someone gaunt. I carried a small tin of tea and sugar as my most precious possessions, more valuable than jewellery in Germany then. The British Guards had given us extra food parcels before departure, knowing what we would find at home. This reversal of care continued after repatriation. British occupation authorities documented former female prisoners using knowledge gained in captivity to improve conditions in their communities. In Hamburg, 23 former Helferinnen established a community kitchen modelled on British communal feeding centres, using British-designed recipes explicitly credited to Ministry of Food publications they had brought home. These centres stretched meagre rations through preparation techniques learned in camp kitchens. Military government reports from December 1947 note, former POWs appear disproportionately represented in food management roles in the German recovery effort. Their practical knowledge of stretching limited supplies has made them valuable assets in the civilian feeding programme. Several have explicitly credited their British internment experience as preparation for current challenges. The knowledge transfer became formalised through unexpected channels. British occupation authorities discovered former prisoners voluntarily conducting cooking demonstrations in women's groups across the British zone. Captain Margaret Wilson's report from Bremen in February 1948 describes, "Attending a German women's meeting today, I was surprised to hear our own Ministry of Food advice being presented by a former Signals auxiliary who had been interned on the Isle of Man. She was teaching British wartime recipes for potato stretching and dried milk reconstitution, explicitly citing her internment as educational. This culinary diplomacy extended to the next generation. Children of former prisoners grew up with stories about British food experiences that contradicted lingering Nazi-era stereotypes. Sociologist Emma Klein's 1978 study of 200 families of former Helferinnen documented recurring themes in these narratives. British fairness in rationing, the reliability of meals even for enemies, and most frequently, the tradition of tea with milk that many families had adopted post-war. "My mother makes us tea the English way every afternoon," reported one teenage respondent in Klein's study. She says in England, even the poorest people had this small luxury during the war. When I was younger and food was still scarce, she would tell us stories about puddings in England to distract us from hunger. British food traditions entered German culture through these personal connections. Restaurant records from the British zone show the first English tea rooms established in 1949, often with former prisoners as proprietors or consultants. These establishments offered authentic British teatime experiences, proper brewing methods, milk added first, a distinctly British practice, and simple baked goods following Ministry of Food recipes. What began as curiosity evolved into genuine cultural appreciation that outlasted occupation. The transformation extended beyond food to broader Anglo-German relations. Foreign Office correspondence from 1950 notes the unexpected diplomatic asset of former female prisoners. Women who experienced fair treatment in British custody have become informal ambassadors for reconciliation. Several have established pen pal programs between German and British schoolchildren, focusing on shared post-war challenges. Perhaps most striking was the long-term impact on German food systems. Agricultural records from 1950-55 show former prisoners disproportionately involved in food production modernization. In Lower Saxony, a cooperative dairy established by 3 former Helferinnen explicitly modelled its distribution system on the British milk priority programme they had witnessed in captivity, ensuring children and pregnant women received allocation first, regardless of payment ability. Margaret Schultz, who had picked raspberries alongside British Land Army women, established a small fruit processing operation in 1952 using preservation techniques learned during internment. Her business records, preserved in the Hamburg Economic Archives, cite specific British methods. Production follows Ministry of Food standards for jam making with reduced sugar content, as practiced during British rationing. This method preserves more natural flavour while using 30% less sugar than pre-war German techniques. By the 1960s, as both nations entered periods of greater prosperity, the food connections established through prisoner experiences evolved into cultural appreciation. Travel records show former prisoners among the first German tourists to visit Britain specifically for culinary experiences. Tour operator archives include a 1964 special journey organised by former Helferinnen. Traditional British foods tour, visiting tea rooms, pudding shops, and rural farms that had hosted German workers during internment. The winter of 1947 had brought the final validation of lessons learned in captivity. During the severe European food crisis that year, Britain, still under rationing itself, nevertheless provided emergency food shipments to its former enemy. Former prisoners recognized the same systemic thinking that had impressed them in captivity. Britain's capacity to organize scarcity fairly rather than allow chaotic deprivation. Helene Meyer, watching British food aid arrive in Hamburg harbour, reportedly remarked to her daughter, "This is what I tried to explain about the English. They maintained civilization even in crisis. They fed us properly as prisoners when they barely had enough themselves, and now they feed former enemies while still rationing their own people. This is strength through organization, not weakness as we were taught." In modern Germany, subtle echoes of this culinary transformation remain visible. Market research from 2018 shows German consumers purchase more British-style tea per capita than any other continental European nation. Traditional British biscuits maintain specialised market niches. Christmas puddings appear in German specialty shops each December, cultural artefacts of a connection forged through the most unexpected circumstances. Proper meals served to hungry enemies. The story of female German prisoners and British food represents history's quietest reconciliation, a transformation through daily bread rather than dramatic gestures. These women arrived as enemies and left as witnesses to a different way of managing society, carrying home not just added weight, but new understanding written in recipe cards and brewing techniques. The British approach to rationing, stretching scarce resources while maintaining morale through ritual and occasional treats, became their template for rebuilding shattered communities. This legacy, begun with simple cups of tea offered to captured enemies, continues in the invisible threads connecting British and German food cultures today.